That was a quick prayer.
Short and sweet.
Short and sweet. Still counts though, right? Hey, you don't know me, I'm Kyle, and I'm happy to be here. I was talking to a guy not too long ago, not the other day, but it wasn't terribly long ago. We were on campus, and we were processing through a lot of different things. He was asking a lot of different questions, kind of trying to sort through some things in his kind of spiritual life. And at one point in the conversation, he just asked me this question: do we have it? No, we do not, because the TV might not be on. Oh, there it is. Here we go. He said this. He said, hey, so Kyle, what's the difference between Christianity and every other religion? Like, what's the difference? Aren't they all basically the same? What's the difference between every other religion? Aren't they all basically the same? And then, I love this because I'm a pastor and I love illustrations. He went on to give me an illustration. He said, isn't it kind of like, okay, you're at Mizzou and you're picking your major. And some of us, we pick engineering. Some of us, we pick, nursing. Some of us pick business. Some of us pick, all the things. He said, and it doesn't really matter because, if you study, if you pass your classes at the end of, 3 to 4 years, you get a degree and it says on your diploma, University of Missouri. Isn't it kind of like that? Isn't it, kind of that idea that it's all basically the same thing? It's all the University of Missouri. They're all kind of, religions are all kind of essentially the same thing when you boil them all down. And I thought, I could see his point. Like I said, I appreciated the attempt at an illustration. I could understand. I thought it was a good question, mostly because I thought it was an honest question. And I wonder, though, if that's also your question. Or maybe if it's not your question, if maybe it's a roommate's question. Or one of your friends' question, or a family member, or maybe even one of the professors of one of your classes, because I think that a lot of people in our culture right now, I think for a lot of us in our culture, we almost assume this kind of idea that at its root, all religions are kind of basically the same. They all kind of teach the same idea. They all kind of say the same thing. They're all about the same thing. But here's the thing: when you press down on that idea, when you press into that claim, when you drill down, I think there's a question that we have to ask, and it's: are they? Do they essentially teach the same thing? Well, that's the question that's going to take us tonight to a single verse. One verse that I want us to look at, and it's found in Acts chapter 4, verse 12. And it says this. It says, there is no salvation, or there is salvation in no one else. For there is no other name under heaven given to people by which we must be saved. I'm going to read it again. There is salvation in no one else. For there is no other name under heaven given to people by which we must be saved. Now, that no one else, this no other name, of course, in the context of the book of Acts, is talking about Jesus, yeah? Now here's something that I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I'm going to say it. I love the Bible, and here's something that I hate about the Bible. Don't know if I can say that, but I'm going to say it. I love and I hate the Bible because here's the thing. The Bible is really, really, really comfortable saying things that make you and me uncomfortable. The Bible is really comfortable saying things to us that I think make us feel kind of uncomfortable. So think for a second, just think about things that that Jesus has said throughout the Gospels. Things like, whoever wants to save their life has to do what? Has to lose it. If you want to save your life, Jesus says, well, then you've got to go and lose it. Well, that's kind of counterintuitive. Or what about the first will be last and the last will be first? Well, what happens? We want to be first. Well, Jesus says the first will be last. Well, I don't want to be last, but Jesus says the last will be first. And Jesus says to pray for your enemies. Now think about that. Pray for your enemies. He says to rejoice. Catch this one. Rejoice when people insult you because of your faith in him. Do you rejoice when people insult you? See, I don't know about you, but for me, those verses and many more throughout the Bible, they make me feel uncomfortable. And here's the thing, I think Acts 4:12, I think it might be the most uncomfortable of all of them, at least now in our culture? Because Acts 4:12, it doesn't just say that Jesus is an option. It says that Jesus is the only way. There is salvation in no one else. There is no other name that can save us. See, the testimony of Acts chapter 4, verse 12 says one name, one way. But to us in 2025, if we're honest, in a culture that prioritizes what? Choice and tolerance and freedom, well, that claim, I think if we're honest, at times it can kind of come across, it can make us feel, well, we're a little offended, right? It seems kind of narrow. It's offensive to our modern ears. And so tonight, what I want to do is I just want to talk a little bit about why Peter said this, and more importantly, I want to talk about why it actually matters for you and me, okay? So let me set it up a little bit. Anytime, this is a phrase that I like to say, anytime you read the Bible, I want you to think about this phrase, context is king. If you've been around Veritas for a minute, you've heard us say that, context is king. And by that, I mean that when you read the Bible, when I read the Bible, it's important for us to ask, hey, what's going on around the verses that we're reading, right? What comes before, what comes after, what's going on in the story, who's writing it, who's saying it, who are they saying it to, what's happening? And so in our case tonight, what is the context? In other words, why does Peter, in this case, why does Peter say what he says? Well, here's the context. The context is that Peter and John, two of Jesus' disciples, close friends of Jesus, they've been arrested, right? They've been arrested, why? Because they were teaching about the resurrection of Jesus. They were teaching that Jesus really was who he said he was, that Jesus really did the thing that nobody thought that he would actually do. He died, but he didn't stay dead, he rose. And these disciples aren't just talking about what they've heard, they're talking about what they've seen because they've seen the risen Jesus. Jesus really was who he says he was, and so that's what they're teaching. And here's the thing, people were listening. People were listening to what these guys were saying. People were listening, and not only were they listening and hearing, but they were believing. Lives were changed. Thousands of lives are being changed. But the religious leaders, they don't like it. See, this teaching, it was a threat to them. It was a threat to their power. It was a threat to their beliefs. And so what they do is they go and grab these guys and they drag them to this court in front of, some of the more prominent leaders at the time. And they ask them this question. They say to them, by what power or in what name have you done this? And by what power or in what name have you taught these things? Are you teaching these things? Do you believe these things? Are you saying these things? By what name or in what power are you doing this? Now, I want you to appreciate the moment for a second because I think sometimes we can just quickly run past this, but I want you to think about the pressure of a question like this, right? Remember the context. They're standing in front of some of the most powerful people, it's certainly in their world at the time, right? People that could ruin them, people that could imprison them, people that could torture them, people that could mess their lives up, even far worse, people that could kill them. That's the moment. Now, I want you to imagine yourself if you were in their shoes. How would you feel? You're standing before, for them, the most powerful court in their world at the time, their world. How would you feel? What would you be thinking? What would you say? Right, maybe that's not a hypothetical. Maybe not that you've been in front of a court, in front of the some of the more prominent, powerful people, but maybe you've been in a situation like this where someone is just wanting to know, what gives you the right to say that thing? Why are you doing what you're doing? Why did you say that? And there's a real cost to the answer, right? Maybe some of you've been in a situation like that. You know what I'm talking about. The easy play for them, it was simple, right? Like, they could keep quiet here. They could compromise. They could back down. They could just shrink back and say, you know what? Like, not really answer the question or somehow divert or somehow say, I'm so sorry, I won't say it again. Please forget, just kind of put their head down and bounce. But that's not what Peter does. Peter takes the question head on and he says this. Let's go back to verse 12. There is salvation, Peter says, in no one else. For there is no other name under heaven given to people by which we must be saved. Now think about that for a second. That certainly wasn't the safe answer, was it? It wasn't safe. Remember, these people have a lot of power over these disciples of Jesus. These people could do a lot of bad things to them. It wasn't safe. It wasn't politically correct. It wasn't safe, but it was the truth. And here's the thing. It wasn't just truth that they were saying. It wasn't just truth that they had heard. This was truth that they experienced. And they experienced it, more importantly, they experienced it from Jesus himself. When he says in John chapter 14, verse 6, Jesus says to a group of people, he says, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Jesus says, I am the way and the truth and the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me. See, Peter, he didn't just hear it, he experienced it when he lived with Jesus, walked with Jesus, spent years with Jesus. Jesus was the way, the life, the truth. And now Peter is quite literally staking his life on that claim. But again, I think for some of us, maybe a lot of us to some extent, right? There's something kind of squirmy about it, right? Yes, maybe it's true, but it's uncomfortable. Why? Because I think what it does is I think it pushes back. I think it pushes back on some of the more deeply held beliefs about religion, some of the more deeply held beliefs about truth. And I say beliefs, but what I'm gonna do, I just wanna spend some time, I'm gonna look at three different, I'm gonna call them myths. I think these are three myths. This is a little different tonight. We're just gonna look at three myths that I think are kind of prominent in certain parts of our culture that my guess is that you've heard, if not wrestled with yourself to some extent. Maybe you're wrestling with them right now. And I think that's why this verse, this single verse, Acts 4:12, I think that's why it's kind of hard for us. Because there's something about these myths that seems compelling. Okay, so let's jump in. First myth is this: all religions are the same. This is what I was saying earlier. I just didn't really get to answer it, right? And maybe, my, scenario with the guy on campus, maybe you're like, yeah, I've had a conversation like that, right? Where it kind of goes, someone says some version of, hey, you know what? I think religion is like just different paths up a mountain, right? I remember, when I was back in college, I remember having that conversation over and over and over with guys in my fraternity house. They'd come home late at night, and they'd want to talk, and they'd say some version of like, hey, religions are all the same because, they're kind of all just different paths up a mountain. And the reality about this mountain is that God sits at the top. God's at the top of the mountain, and human beings, we're at the bottom, and we're just trying to, get up to the top. And so that's what religion is. Some paths are steep, some are windy, some are rocky, some are smooth, but that's kind of the religious journey, right? We're just on this journey of religion, which is just different paths up to the same top. And I think there's something kind of intriguing about it, because on the one hand, it sounds kind of respectful, right? And we might even say, hey, this kind of idea is inclusive, and we like to be inclusive. But the thing about it is, it sounds respectful, it sounds inclusive, but when you actually start to consider what it's saying, when you actually start to consider the claim itself, I think that metaphor of the mountain, I think it breaks down pretty quickly. So let's just think, just for a second, I'm not gonna get into this is a 60,000 foot flyover, right? Of just a few of the world's largest religions. So let's just apply the metaphor to some of the largest religions in the world. So take Buddhism for a second. Buddhism, right? I don't know if you know much about Buddhism, but here's the thing about Buddhism. What Buddhism says about the mountain, if we're just gonna go with that, is that, here's the thing, nobody sits at the top. There's no God at the top of the mountain because there's no such thing as a personal God. And so getting to God isn't even the point in the religion of Buddhism. Actually, the point is reaching nirvana. Or take Hinduism for a second. What does Hinduism teach? Well, again, simplification, right? 60,000 foot overview. What Hinduism teaches is that at the top of the mountain are thousands of gods and goddesses, right? Because everything is God and God is in everything. Islam, of course, says what? That Allah is at the top of the mountain. See, what Jesus is saying is very different. What Jesus is saying in John 14:6, when he says, I'm the way and the truth and the life, or what Peter and John are saying in Acts 4:12, there's salvation in no other name, no one else. Jesus' claim is very, very different. And so maybe, just maybe, I think it's true, but maybe the mountain, maybe that's not the best illustration, right? Maybe that's not the best way to think about it. What if we thought about it instead like this, like a maze, right? So think for a second about a maze, and I'm gonna take it a step further because we live in Missouri, so we're gonna just embrace it. We're gonna think corn maze for a second, right? Here's Schrock's corn maze from last year. If you haven't been to Schrock's, it's pretty cool. Go check it out. But here's the thing with a maze, right? When you look at the maze, there's so many different paths, aren't they? And they all kind of look the same. Except here's the thing about the maze. We know this because, we're grown adults. Not every path in a maze leads to the center, right? They look the same. They feel the same. They're similar to a certain extent. But a lot of the paths in a maze, well, they end in dead ends, right? Only one path in a maze, at least a good maze, is going to get you to the center. That's what Jesus is claiming to do. That's what Jesus is claiming to do when he says, I am the way. He's not saying I am a way, he's saying I am the way that leads to God. Now, just to be clear, just because he says, I'm not saying just because he says that, it makes it true per se, right? Don't hear what I'm not saying. I believe that it is true. But I'm saying that because I just want to be honest for a second, but I also want to say, look, if you're not quite sure what you believe, right? If you're still wrestling with these kinds of ideas or maybe different ideas, but it kind of overlaps, all I'm trying to get us to interface with a little bit or to consider is this idea that actually the claim that all religions are basically the same, it's a myth, right? That's my big point. I'm just trying to get you to see 60,000 foot overview that actually, no, they don't, right? They don't teach the same thing. They aren't the same thing. They are not basically the same. And to say that they are, in part, I say that because it's actually not fair to those different religions. And it's also just not intellectually honest. If you're in a search for what you believe about the world and what you believe about God and what you believe about yourself, it's not intellectually honest to say, well, it's all kind of basically the same. I'm just trying to help us think, right? And so if that's you, or if this is like, hey, maybe you're thinking about a friend who's going through something like this right now, questioning these things. First of all, don't get off-put by questions, right? Don't get overwhelmed by questions. Invite curiosity. In fact, compare answers. But just don't be afraid to find out that not all paths lead to the center of the maze, right? Not all paths lead to the same place. Second myth, truth is relative. You've heard this, yeah? I think it's another one of these myths that comes up a lot. Sometimes we say it kind of jokingly or even more seriously. And I think the way that I hear it often is some version of, hey, listen, that's great that Jesus works for you, or that's great that Christianity has changed your life. It's just not true for me. But some version of that, you get it, right? Like, hey, what's true for you doesn't necessarily have to be true for me, but what's true for me is true for me, and so it's still true because all truth is relative. And again, it sounds tolerant, it sounds humble. But does it actually work? Does it actually work? So there's kind of a famous story that's told kind of on this point about three blind guys and an elephant, right? Maybe you've heard it. I'm gonna do my best to retell it. But the idea is this, right? That there are three blind guys and they each touch a different part of the elephant. And so one guy goes up to the elephant, he touches the trunk and he says, it's a snake. One of the guys goes up and he kind of puts his arm around the leg and he says, oh, no, it's not a snake, it's a tree. Another guy, he goes up and he touches the side of the elephant and he's like, oh, it's not a tree, it's not a snake, it's a wall, right? Like this massive elephant side, it's a wall. And that story is told to kind of say, well, that's exactly what religion is like. Each guy only has part of the truth. Each religion has only part of the story. Nobody, no religion can see comprehensively the entire picture. But there's a problem with that story. The problem with that story is that you can only tell that story if you see the entire elephant. Meaning the storyteller has a vantage point, is claiming to see, think about this for a second, it's a bit heady, but just stick with me for a second. The storyteller of that story, there are 3 blind men who go and touch an elephant, claims to see the bigger picture, which is ironically doing the very thing that it claims you can't do. It's making a truth claim. It's making a truth claim. Because that's what happens when we say all truth is relative. Think about this for a second. When we say, hey, all truth is relative, I know it sounds open-minded, but what it's actually doing, it's sneaking in an absolute truth claim from the back door, right? That truth claim is, I see the whole truth. Truth is relative is to say, I see the whole truth. That's a truth claim. But you see, John and Peter, they didn't believe that all truth was relative. I mean, go back to the verse. This is not like a what's true for you is not true for me, or what's true for me doesn't have to. This is not a relative statement. They believe it to be true. There is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given to people by which we must be saved. And here's why that matters. Truth isn't about what works for me or what works for you. Truth isn't about what works for us. It's about what is real. Truth is about reality. So imagine for a second that you're sick and a doctor prescribes you some medicine to help you get well. And imagine saying to that doctor, well, hey, I know you think that medicine is gonna help me. I know that you think this medicine is what I need in order to be healed. But that's not true for me. That's not tolerant, is it? Right? That's not humble. No, it's dangerous. It has consequences to say, that doesn't have to be true for me, to a doctor about medicine to help you get sick. It's dangerous, right? It has consequences. See, the point that I'm trying to make is that Christianity, it's not just my truth or your truth. It's a claim about reality, that Jesus really is who he says he is. Jesus really did rise from the dead, or he didn't. But if he did, it changes everything. And here's the thing. It's not just a truth claim. That's not just a truth claim. It's an invitation. Jesus is inviting you to trust a real person who can actually save you from the consequence of your sin. It's an invitation. What Jesus is saying to us in John 14:6 or in Acts 4:12, what Jesus is saying to us is you can trust me. You can trust me. I am the truth, Jesus says. Not a truth. I am the truth. But when we say that out loud, we bump into the third myth. And the third myth is this: Christians are arrogant to say that Jesus is the only way. Now, I don't know about you, but as I kind of wrestle with these myths personally, I think this is of the three, this is the thing that kind of hits me the most, or hits me the hardest, or makes me kind of feel like that cringiness, because I don't know about you, but I've heard this, like, hey, you're arrogant to suggest you know what's better, or you're arrogant, or intolerant, or whatever word you want to fill in the blank here. You're arrogant to claim that you know the truth and every other religion is wrong. Isn't it arrogant? Isn't it unloving to say that your religion is true and every other religion isn't? You ever heard that? Ever heard someone say that? Maybe someone said that to you. Maybe you kind of think that. Again, on the surface, if we're honest, it does sound kind of arrogant. And of course, you can say it arrogantly, right? It sounds a bit arrogant. It sounds even a bit unloving. Unless it's true. Think about that. Unless it sounds arrogant, it sounds unloving unless it's true. Because if it's true, if Acts 4:12, John 14:6 is true, then the most unloving, intolerant thing, arrogant thing you could do is to stay silent. But think about that. If it's true, it's actually far more unloving to not say anything, which is the exact opposite of the claim being made. Think about another doctor illustration for a second. So imagine you've got a chronic illness and doctors discover a cure, and that doctor comes to you to say, hey, I've got the cure for your illness. Is that arrogant for them to say? Is it unloving for that doctor to come to you and say, hey, we've got the cure for your disease. We've got the cure for your illness. Is that unloving? Is that arrogant? Of course not, right? It's compassionate. It's loving. It might literally save my life. And here's the thing, that illustration, it's not just an illustration because the Bible teaches us that that's exactly what's true of all of us. We do have a sickness. We do have an illness. We do have a disease, a chronic disease in all of us called sin. And that illness, that disease, it separates us from a holy God and it leads us to death. But here's the thing, that's not the end of the story. Yes, that's true, but the Bible over and over and over again says, hey, look, that's not the end of the story, because the Bible also says that Jesus loves you, loves me, loves us so much. I mean, Johnny was just talking about this, so much that he stepped into the story. Jesus steps into the story. Jesus steps into your story, my story, our story as a man. He didn't have to, but he did. He chose to. And he died a death that he didn't deserve. And he came out of that grave so that we could have forgiveness, so that we could have life instead of death. That's not arrogance. That's good news. See, I want you to catch this. Exclusive belief in Jesus. It didn't make the earliest Christians arrogant. It made them radically loving, radically inclusive. So early church, Roman world, it's brutal, right? The poor were despised. I don't know if you know much about Rome back in the first century. Hard way to live, terrible place to be, right? Poor were despised, women were devalued, slavery was rampant, the sick were often abandoned. But what happens is Christians come along. And these Christians, they start to believe that Jesus really is the only way, that in Jesus is truth and life, and Jesus is the only way. And what happens to Christians and this growing movement of, we'll call it Christianity? Well, it becomes the most welcoming community in the empire. Radically countercultural. They cared for the poor. Women were honored. Racial divides were crossed so that unity happened. They risked their lives to care for the sick, to care for the poor. Why? Because at the center of their faith, for these earliest Christians, at the center of their faith was a man who was radically inclusive, who welcomes us in. See, the exclusive claim of Jesus, it produced radical love, not arrogance. See, at the end of the day, Jesus doesn't leave us neutral. He doesn't leave us neutral. He says either he is who he says he is, or he isn't. Right? There's no in between. Either Jesus is who he says he is, either Jesus really did rise from the grave, or he didn't. There's no in between. But here's what I don't want you to miss tonight. Here's what I don't want you to miss. Acts 4:12, it's not about choosing the best philosophy. It's not about winning an argument. It's not about betting on religion. It's about a person. Acts 4:12 is about a person who knows you, like Johnny was talking about. A person who loves you. A person who went to the cross for you, a person who walked out of the grave so that you could have forgiveness, so that you could have life. See, Peter, he staked everything on that reality. He staked everything on that Jesus, not because it was popular, not because it was easy, Not because it was safe, but because he had seen it. He had seen the risen Jesus with his own eyes. He'd seen that Jesus was alive. And he'd experienced it. And it changed him. See, if Jesus is alive, then Acts 4:12, it's not a threat. It's an invitation. This is what I want you to remember. If Jesus really is alive, and I believe with all that he is, then we don't have to be threatened by Acts 4:12. We don't have to be uncomfortable with Acts 4:12 because it's an invitation. It's an invitation what? Well, it's an invitation to stop chasing dead ends. It's an invitation to belong to a God who welcomes you in. It's an invitation to a life bigger than yourself. That's why the earliest Christians, they were ordinary people. Ordinary people in a divided world, in a brutal world, in a lot of ways just like us, right? Ordinary people in a hard world. It's why they became known for their radical love. Because when you trust in the one who saves, you're set free to love like he did. Think about that. When you trust in the one name that saves, Jesus sets you free to love and to live like he did. Music team, you guys can come back. I want to leave you thinking about this question. It's just, what about us? Right, that was true for the first century. It's been true for Christians throughout the centuries. And in a lot of ways, this is the question that I come back to a lot because I think it's the question that impacts me the most. And it's just, what about me? Who am I going to be? What about us as a community? Like, think about this for a second. What if we became a community not known just for, of course it's important what we believe, but what if it wasn't just about what this community believes? What if we became known for how we loved? What if people looked at Veritas, or your pockets of friends, or your small groups, or your connection group, or the various things that you're a part of? What if they looked at you and your friends, your group, this community, and said, I don't know if I believe what they believe yet, but that's a community of people that loves people well. What kind of impact would that have? If that were increasingly true of you and your pockets of influence, what kind of impact would that have in your dorm, in your fraternity house, on your team, in your class, at your job, in your growing friend group? What kind of impact would that have if that's what we became known as? You see, I think we've been talking a lot about witness. That is the kind of witness, precisely the kind of witness that points people to Jesus, not ourselves. It's not about us, it's about Jesus, right? Because at the end of the day, Jesus is not a way, he's not a truth, he's not a life, he's the way, the truth, the life. So Acts 4:12, I'm gonna read it one more time. There is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given to people by which we must be saved. That's not arrogance. It's not about winning an argument. It's good news about meeting the one who knows you, the one who loves you, the one who's welcoming you in and wants to give you the life that he created you for. Let me pray for us. Oh, Jesus, we aren't worthy of that kind of love. And yet that's precisely what we have in you. And so we thank you, we praise you. And we confess the ways that we're tempted to not want what you're offering. The ways in which we use some of these truths, even that we're talking about tonight, against people. Almost the very opposite of what you do. We use them as arguments. We use them to win, but you say, no, it's not about that. It's about welcoming, bringing more people in, more love. God, I pray that would be true of me. Forgive me for the ways it's not, but I pray that it would be true for us. That we would be the kind of community known in Columbia for how we love people because you loved us first. May it be so. It's in your name we pray. Amen.